get a sticker on it. We can see your face. And glory to God. Isn't that cool back there, man? The armor of God. Look at all that stuff. You see the breastplate, shod with the gospel of peace, the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit. Man, if only they would have taught me that kind of stuff when I was like 4 and 5 years old. You know? 6, 7, 8, 9, 12. And then when I did hear it was all about what I'm going to do to wake up in the morning and put it on myself, and then that was going to be my protection. Instead of realizing it was all a condition of the heart and a persuasion of the heart, right? And that the Spirit of the living God would be the helmet of salvation, right? Guarding your mind from the carnal mind, right? The breastplate of righteousness, man. Guarding your heart with God's righteousness towards you, you know, and your feet shod with the gospel of peace, where the way that you walk is in the way of union with God. The recognition that you're one with God, that being one with God, I think sometimes we still think of it in terms of separation. Like there's God and here's us. And so God has that and we have this. And, you know, and then we try to call that union. But that's not really thoughts of union. Union is we're one with God, and what God has, we have. Right? His life is our life. His spirit is our spirit. His strength is our strength. His righteousness is our righteousness. All those kinds of things. And so it just makes me happy that the kids are being taught about that. Gird up your loins, you know?
That they're being taught it from a proper spiritual perspective.
Yeah.
Because I can remember driving my truck to work every morning, reciting the armor, all from a carnal perspective, and it didn't have any effect at all.
It's kind of like magic or witchcraft.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
It is, and it's good that we can just be honest about it, because it was. I mean, so much of what we were busy with in church is actually more like witchcraft than it was about walking in the way of Christ. And we don't realize it. It's like Paul when he come to Mars Hill. I perceive that you are too superstitious.
And it brings fear.
Well, absolutely it brings fear.
People who don't do it, they're afraid something's going to happen.
Well, anytime you think that you're going to do that, I mean, even if we don't recognize it outwardly, somewhere in our heart we recognize that our ability is worthless. Right? Somewhere we recognize it. Even if out of our mouth we won't confess it, or we haven't like recognized it in our heads, like intellectually, deep down our hearts know that our ability can't do anything. Right?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Because the best of all people with the greatest of all abilities lived on the earth, and not a single one of them pulled themselves out of the grave. Right? So all their ability was worthless. Right? And so even though we would wake up and do all these things, fear is the foundation from which you would be doing that. Fear itself.
Absolutely.
It isn't God.
Yeah.
The Spirit of God wouldn't cause you to wake up and do that.
Yeah.
Because the Spirit of God would be telling you about how I am all things to all people in every way and everything that they need. And so you would wake up thinking about how the Spirit of God will guard your heart. You'll wake up thinking about how the Spirit of God will keep your salvation, that it will keep your heart in peace, that the Spirit of God will keep your walk. You know, and you wake up thinking about that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
See, that's not born from fear.
No, I was definitely afraid of the world pressing in on me.
Yeah.
Definitely afraid of that. Right? Very clear.
Well, and then we're kind of taught it from a fear position.
Yes.
The way it's taught is, if you don't do this, you're leaving yourself open to the attacks of the enemy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, and we give Satan all of this power that he doesn't have.
That's
at
right.
all. We give him all of this power,
That's right.
and it screws us over big time.
That's right. So it's well-intentioned, but it's like, it's long been the ways of man in order to try to manipulate an action, even should we think the action is good. It's long been the ways of man to use fear to manipulate the right action. Right? Or lack to manipulate the right action. So even if we sat with something that we thought was good, the ways of man, they don't even recognize they're doing this, but the ways of man is, well, this is so good, we have to get them to do this, and then we'll use fear.
Right?
We don't realize that's what we're doing.
It's a very effective motivator.
Right. People are already afraid.
Yes.
And so then you just come and tap into their fear. And you can get people to do anything that are filled with fear. I tell you what, though, you can't get people to do anything that are filled with the love of God in their heart. Because fear's been removed, and when the language of fear comes from another person, it doesn't compute. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't compute. And should something in this world press in on us that tries to bring fear to us, the Spirit of God will well up inside of us. And it will process through that thing we're experiencing. It'll send the fear away. And it will perfect the love of God in our hearts in those moments. You know, I remember when the air conditioners got stolen off the roof. And we couldn't have church for like 5 weeks. Man, the first week or 2 weeks, I don't want to say I was filled with fear, but I definitely felt the pressing in on fear. You know, because I heard the voice that said, well, Greg, if you really were a preacher, you'd have a tent out in the parking lot and you'd be having church anyway. So what kind of a preacher are you? You know, and then you hear the voice, you know, because we couldn't afford to get new air conditioners. And so then you hear the voice, well, Greg, if you were preaching the truth about tithing, then you would have the money. You know, and so the fear tries to come to you. You see how fear, even the serpent's voice, he tried to put fear in me about money to manipulate me back to tithing, or to try to trick me into thinking that I had the wrong idea. It can't possibly be only Christ and Him crucified, Greg. You know, he tried to use fear. He tries to come at you with fear. When he attacked Adam and Eve, when he attacked Eve, he came at her with fear. You lack something that you need to be like God. That inputs fear. Fear will compel you to do something. But when the love of God can be perfected in your heart, it removes fear, right? It removes fear. And so then what happens is your motivation to do anything isn't fear. And it becomes easy to discern that when fear comes, that foundation isn't the foundation that can bring forth life. I remember Becky and I, it's not that we didn't want to have kids, but we never felt like this overwhelming desire that like, we want to get married and go have kids. We never felt this overwhelming desire. And for a while it was fine. You know, because we got married, I think, at like 24. I think I was 24 and she was 25. For a while it was fine because we had a group of people or friends that not all of them had kids. But as we kept getting a little bit older, all of a sudden all those friends started having kids, right? One by one, they all started having kids till I think like the last ones dropped out of the race at like when we were 35. They all had kids. And Becky and I looked around and saw we didn't have any kids. And the thought pressed in on us like, is there something wrong with you? Because you don't have any kids. What's wrong with you that you don't have any kids? The thought that we lacked because we didn't have any kids started coming into the picture. All of our friends have kids. We're the only ones without kids. You know, you see how that thought quickly turns into what's wrong with you? That you don't have any kids. And so there was a period of time where I thought, well, I'm going to pray and seek God about having kids. And during that process, I began, sometimes your intellect kicks in. And your intellect starts weighing things. Instead of just talking with God and letting your heart see what God says. And during that period of time, as my intellect was kicking in, I started thinking about if something happened to me and Becky was all alone. And that thought just like rent me on the inside. Like I can't even imagine. Even like right now, I just want to start like crying. The thought that something could happen to me, because that's a very real possibility for me. Who knows what I'm going to go do, what I'm going to go say to upset some people, right? I mean, get me outside of this country and get me like in the Middle East somewhere. I'm going to say the same things I say in there. I can't help myself. And so it's a very real possibility that something could happen to me. And the thought that Becky could be alone. I mean, I started thinking of like Christmases. And Becky like 60, 65, sitting in a room all alone in some home with no one that would come see her. And no one, I mean, it just like, like on the inside, I was, let it never be. And so I started thinking, we got to have some kids. Because I started thinking, I can't even imagine my wife alone somewhere if I'm not there. What if that just killed me. And so for like a month, we got to start having kids. We got to bring forth these kids. We got to start having these kids. So we started thinking about that. And all of a sudden, God came and revealed to me that my whole motivation was fear. That I was afraid. And that it wasn't a desire to have kids. That it was a fear. That was the foundation. No. And he didn't just come like reveal it to me and say, well, Greg, you got to figure out how to change your mind there, buddy. It was like when he came and revealed to me that the foundation was fear, he also came with the word and said, Becky's life is in my hands. And that you have nothing to be afraid of. And he started to go into telling me there'll never be a time where he won't visit Becky. There'll never be a time where he won't be with Becky. There'll never be a time when Becky is alone, that's a lie from the pit of hell. And he just removed that foundation of fear, and all of a sudden I could see clearly again. And there was no urge to have any kids. It was gone. And I felt great peace about not having any kids. And I can honestly say there's not a day where I wake up ever and think, man, we need to have kids. Or why don't we have kids? Or I wish we have kids. Now, I hope everybody understands what I'm saying. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with having kids. Okay? So this isn't a word about whether it's right or wrong to have kids. It's just a word about how fear tries to motivate us. And I use this as an example. If you have a lot of people have a God-given desire to have kids. Okay? But a lot of times, if we don't have kids, fear tries to come in and tries to tell us we lack, or we're not as we ought to be, or something isn't right if we don't have kids. A lot of times the church will make you feel like this. They'll take that verse in Genesis and wrongly interpret it, where it says that God, in the King James, it says God told Adam to multiply and be fruitful. We only interpret that carnally, and the church takes that as a command. You got to have a bunch of kids. You're supposed to be fruitful. You're supposed to be fruitful. But actually what that is God promising Adam that he would make him fruitful. When you go and break that down in the Hebrew, God is promising Adam to make him fruitful. That's what God's doing there. He's not commanding Adam to be fruitful. Listen, God didn't even command Jesus to be fruitful. Jesus didn't raise himself up from the dead. The reason Jesus is fruitful is because he was raised from the dead and sat at the right hand of God. I hate to break it to everybody. Jesus didn't raise himself from the dead. He didn't seat himself at the right hand of God. It wasn't his good works that raised him from the grave. It was the Spirit of God. It was the Father's opinion of him. So it's the Father that made Jesus fruitful. The Father promised the last Adam the same thing he promised the first Adam. I promise you, I will make you fruitful. The Bible says that God promised to make Jesus the heir of the world. When you become the heir of the world, that's how you become fruitful. Right? You have many brethren. You become the firstborn from the dead. So when you become the firstborn from the dead, then there can be many brothers and sisters that can also be raised from the dead. And so, who raised Jesus from the dead? Jesus or the Father?
I think I heard somebody say something recently. Somewhere in there, I remember somebody saying something about Jesus raising himself from the dead, and I'm thinking,
Yeah, that's Antichrist. Is what that is. And we don't have to get superstitious about what that means. Antichrist would just mean that's a contradiction to the wisdom that is Christ.
Yes.
Okay? Because the very thing Jesus did was that he rested in the Father's promise to him. That's what he did. Right? The Father didn't come and say, you must make yourself fruitful, and then Jesus rested in his own ability. If the Father commanded Jesus to make himself fruitful, then he'd be resting in his own works.
yeah, that just doesn't fit at all.
And so that logic doesn't fit at all. And what it says is that through the righteousness of faith, Jesus became the heir of the world. And so what did Jesus do? Faith is to believe. What did he believe? That God would make him the heir of the world. That God would make him exceedingly fruitful. That God would raise him from the dead. That God would seat him at the right hand. The Psalms is filled with all of this, where David is talking by inspiration of the Spirit of the Son. And Jesus talked about how the Father would not suffer him to see corruption. My flesh rests in the certainty that you won't leave my soul in Hades. Amen. That you won't suffer my body to see corruption, but that you will raise me up from the grave. That's what Jesus did. He believed on that. And in him believing on that, the Father could do what the Father do. Right?
Jesus is our pattern, so we know we can't do anything he didn't do.
That's right.
So the Father's going to raise us up.
That's right. Now what we can do, is what we can get confused about is Jesus is the representative of the human race, but he's also God. So if we want to look at Jesus as God in that vein, right, we can say God promised to make us fruitful. And so we could say God brought forth fruit. Okay? But that's not Jesus the man. Right? That's not Jesus the last Adam.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, I was telling Greg and Jay who came in, my wife's mom passed this week, and of course there's sorrow. We miss them. I mean, we missed our dog when he died. But I was exercising, and so my hymnal, the hymn I was listening to was Stevie Wonder. I take a lot of those songs and just turn them around. So it was once in my life. So it says, for once in my life, I have found someone who needs me. Right?
Yes.
So that was years ago, that was a huge moment for me, an aha moment. Wait a minute, God needs me? I was always taught, He don't need you.
Yeah.
He can do everything by himself. Well, you know, we need our own children, right? We need our own dog. You know, we need each other. Right? The love there. So the rest of the song, I started laughing as I listened to the song, and it goes, once in my life, I found someone who needs me. I won't be alone anymore. So when you come to that moment, even in the song it says sorrow, we will have sorrow at times, but it will not be the sorrow that was in the past. We will have a hope. That sorrow will turn to joy, will turn to hope through His love. So I really love that moment with Him, and I love thinking that He needs me. When I was taught for most of my life, He does not need me, as if I was, get away from me, I don't need you.
Yeah.
Now He's, come, I need you. So my grandson, 2 years old, they sent a picture Friday of him. They live in a new area, building new houses, and there's big trucks. And he's enamored. He jumps with joy at the trucks. So I said, you know, what unabashed joy? My son texted, you know what I saw? I saw God. That would be God looking at us. Oh my gosh. Here's Maurice. I'm so happy to see him. And I just laughed out loud. I thought about that in my mind. I thought, wow, you know, he looks Jill up in the morning. He goes, look at her. Man, I love that girl.
Oh.
Let's go start the day.
Amen.
It just blessed me. Yep.
Yeah, it's like the prodigal son, the father. The father didn't need the son in the sense of, and that's where their definition of need is all wrong. Right?
Yes.
The father didn't need the son in the sense that he would cease to exist or his life wouldn't be there anymore if the son wasn't there. But the father needed the son in the sense of what his desire in his heart was. Right? The desire in his heart was to fellowship with the son for all eternity, and for the son to partake of his life, and for the son to inherit everything he had. And so from that sense, yeah, the father needed the son and the father needed us. But what's interesting is Psalm 8. David, and this is the Spirit of the Son talking also, so we could see it. This is one of the most beautiful passages in my heart, and it's the question, what is man? Or who is man? Or what kind of a being is man? God. And David's asking God. He's looking out over all of creation. He sees the stars. There was a meteor shower last night. Did you guys go out and see the meteor shower? The Perseus or whatever? It was like the time of the year where you could see it more than anything. And so it's just... And so imagine David. I mean, there wasn't street lights everywhere. So he's just up on a cliff, pitch black. I mean, he's seeing the stars everywhere, the glory. And he's saying, what is it about man? What is it about me, God? That when you see all of that, and I see all this beauty, that your mind is filled full with me. Now look what David says, and look what this word means. What is man that thou art mindful of him? That means, who is man that in light of all this beauty, your mind is filled full with them? David's asking a question. Who are we? And the Son of Man, that you visitest him. Now, that word visit, it doesn't sound like that much, does it?
No.
Well, when you look that up in the Hebrew, do you know what it means? To pay attention to, observe, to attend to seek, look about for, to need, to miss, to lack. What is it about man? That the heaven is your throne and the earth is your footstool, but there's something in you that says you need them. What is it about man? That the heaven, you have everything. You created everything. What is it about me that you miss me when I'm gone? That you feel like something's not right when I'm not there? What is it? And that's a powerful question. And every human being, if you hadn't already come to that place where you've asked God that, or you've got a revelation of what it is about you that causes God to miss you when you're not around, right? Or that causes God to seek after you. God seeks after you. When God looked around and Elohim said, my goodness, man, the ones we created to be one with us and live with all eternity so we could love them, they're not here anymore. What is it about you that when that happened, God said, that ain't right? And He went seeking after us. He decided it wasn't right. And so in that sense, we all, and I talked about this a long time ago, but we all have a dream for our life. Like we sit around and when we imagine our life and we think about our life, we have like this image, this dream. It's like the thing that we think is the most beautiful thing that could be for our life. You know? For me, it's preaching the gospel anywhere. But if I'm just being honest, you know, and if I'm just being funny, please understand what I'm saying. I love nothing more than to be here in Slidell, Louisiana. But, you know, if we won like that Powerball jackpot or something, listen, man, I'd buy like an island and name it Gospel Revolution Island. And we'd build like a big resort there. We'd build like a big resort there, and it'd be like a gospel resort. And anybody who wanted to be on the resort could be there, and there'd be boats and a private jet, obviously, if we win $300-something million, and we could come and go. But that's where I'd like to preach the gospel. You see what I'm saying? And then anybody that wanted to be there could be there, and their gifts and callings could manifest in that place with all of us, right? It's not to seclude ourselves from the world. It's just that, man, I like the beach. I like getting a tan. I like swimming in the clear blue water. I like that stuff. I like being by the water. I love that stuff. And so you could say that's a dream in my heart. You know, if that's someday came to, man, I'd sit around with a straw hat on, sipping out of a coconut and be like, you know?
Glory to God.
Now, do you guys understand what I'm talking about? We all have that kind of a vision or thought in our heart. So does God. So did God. He also sat around thinking like that. The Father, Son, and Spirit. And the image they had, the dream they had was of you. The image they had, the dream they had of what could be the greatest life they could ever have involved you, man. Involved them being able to hang out with you and enjoy you and enjoy your passions and desires and to experience life with you, in you, and through you. That was their dream. And so in the sense that when Adam ate from the tree, Adam separated himself from God in his heart, in his mind, and even in his life. Listen, man, there's something in them that said, that ain't right. And so they needed us from that standpoint. Not to have life, but for the dream in their heart to come to pass, they needed man. Right? It's like Martin Luther King, I had a dream. I have a dream. Listen, you can only say something like that because God first said it. And so if you want to think of Elohim, and you want to put passionate words and thoughts to it, and you want to speak about Elohim from the standpoint of union, and you're thinking about in the beginning, Elohim said, let us make man. Man, think of it like this. In the beginning, Elohim said, I had a dream. I have a dream that there can be someone like me, someone who can feel what I feel, someone who could share with me in my life, that we could share our thoughts, we could share our dreams, we could share our passions, our desires, and we could live for all eternity together in a glorified creation. And I could spend all eternity loving them with every ounce of my heart, every ounce of my strength, every ounce of my mind. That's Elohim, man. That's God. God who lacks nothing. I mean, it sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? God who lacks nothing decided He needed you.
That's why He lacks nothing. Honestly.
Amen. Amen. And there's a whole lot. If we sat around praying in the Spirit and just meditating on that, we could probably come with a lot of great revelation. Just trying to look at that contradiction. The fact that He doesn't lack anything is almost the foundation from where He could say He needed us. Right? Now that doesn't make any sense to the carnal mind.
No, it doesn't.
It sounds like a contradiction.
Yeah.
It sounds like a contradiction.
Well, when you got a heart like that, there's nothing missing.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You got a heart that's out for people.
Yeah.
Not lacking anything.
That's right. That's right. Otherwise, your heart wouldn't be after people. Your heart couldn't actually be after
You'd be
someone
satisfied
else.
with yourself.
Right. Right. You'd be busy looking into yourself.
Right.
And so you wouldn't possess the capacity to think that. Right? And it's not need like humans think of need. We're not talking about like an obsession where someone comes with some OCD and their girlfriend or boyfriend left and they find, I need that, you know, like they're now like need to get on, you know, medication and everything to try and cope. Okay? And that's not to disparage a person if they've gone through that. We're just comparing that to the need that we're talking about with God. And I say this a lot, but so many times we think of what a human thinks need means and we try to attribute that definition to God. Right? And God's definition of need is completely different. And you were thinking like God and they were thinking like man. Right? The beautiful thing is man was created to think like God. And so you were actually thinking the way man was supposed to think. Right? But they had been corrupted by the tree. And so they were thinking like fallen man, like Adam's fallen mind thought. Right? Which is actually contrary to man. It's actually contrary. Most of the church would say, you know, they would say only by the mercy of God can we be with Him. And their definition of mercy would be we all suck. We're all worthless. There's no value in us. And even in spite of that, God still will let us be with Him. Right?
Yeah.
And so when you come and say, God needs me, brother, you're thinking too highly of yourself. Right?
Oh, yeah.
I've heard a couple of things on the internet just like that, talking about God needing us. You know, and it being disparaged by other people. But I don't believe that we were hearing or understanding where that word was coming from.
Nope.
I think it's more like, you know, Christ described.
Absolutely.
Well,
I mean, I believe it.
And a legalistic mind cannot compute that God desires me that much.
Yeah.
Humans think need means I lack something, so I need something
Yes,
to lack.
that's right.
And there is no lack in God, so
It wouldn't
that doesn't
work.
even make sense.
Wouldn't work.
Right. And humans think lack means I lack something I need for life.
Yeah.
Whereas God wouldn't look at lack that way. He wouldn't look at I lack something I need for life. But if he had a dream for his life and something he wanted and that wasn't there, he could say, I don't have what I want right now. Right?
That makes complete sense.
And that's what he thought about man. I don't have what I want right now. But the legalistic mind can't even understand who man is. That's why the Holy Spirit has David say what he says there. Who is man? What is it about me? Right? Imagine Adam in his nakedness. Right? That could be a thought he could have. He sees his body clothed in death. He sees that every time he tries to bring forth life, he only brings forth more death. He sees his shame and his nakedness. But then he sees God's mind is filled full with him. He doesn't see that God shooed him to the side to go play patty cake with the giraffes or to go swim in the waterfall and to abandon Adam. But he sees that in that place, God's mind is still filled full with him. That God seeks after him. That God comes after him. And so it's like the mind of a person trapped in death that sees God coming at them. The spot of great revelation would be not to deny that God comes after you or needs you. It would be to ask, look at me, Father. What is it about me that you seek me, that you decided you need me, that you decided you want me, that you can't see your life apart from me? What is it? Because I see myself and I don't see it, man. You see?
Yeah.
Now from that foundation, your heart is open to massive revelation. Because you can just hear Elohim now saying, I'm glad you asked.
Now listen.
Let me show you. And then God answered the question in the resurrection of Jesus. Because Jesus is a man.
Yes. Right.
And so God answered David's question, and David asked on behalf of all human beings in the resurrection. This is who man is to me, that I miss them when they're gone, that I need them when they're not near me, or that I feel like something's just not right when they're not there. This is who man is. Boom. They're my sons and daughters. They're my offspring. They're my children. They're the apple of my eye. My heart skips a beat when I look at them. I see myself in them when I see them. I see all my hopes and dreams for my life come alive when I look at them, when I hold them, when I can talk to them, when I can hug them, when I can cry with them, when I can play with them, when they can dunk a basketball on me, when I can go fishing with them, when I can paint with them, when I can build a house with them. All my hopes and dreams and aspirations for life, I see them come alive right before my face. I see my dream for my kingdom. That's who man is.
You're not going to hear that preached in many churches.
No, and that's why I was afraid that I'm going to go somewhere and get killed and Becky will be alone.
Well, that's not true, because if you're fearing it, that's the lie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, but I'm just jokingly connecting that back.
I mean, we can look at that, and when we fear something, we know that's not going to happen.
That's right.
Believe it or not, so
That's-
it's just a lie turning.
You know, when the air conditioner got stolen and you were believing that you could have a tent, well, we agreed with you, so we weren't helping.
I thought I was the biggest loser preacher that ever was. You're just going to let that stop church, Greg? I mean, seriously, you hear these voices, You're sitting in here by yourself.
You're going to lose all your people.
It was our voices.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to leave.
No, but we felt pressed in upon too.
Yeah.
That's the conversation I had with God. It wasn't to disparage the people. We hadn't been here that long. So we're still preaching grace, and not everybody that was coming along to the church had been in grace for a while. No one had.
Right.
And so I remember telling God, yeah, that's wonderful. I'm free. But everybody else is wondering why we're not having church. And they're busy out there looking for another church. How can we survive? So I'm happy to preach the gospel. And I have no shame in expressing the deepest concerns and fears and insecurities in my heart. Something that I find grace has done to me is I feel no shame in talking about the areas where I felt pressed in on by the lie. Let's just go ahead and plop it out on the table. I don't need to be justified to anybody. So I don't need to prove to you guys that I'm a great preacher by proving that even in the moment of whatever you want to call it, in the moment of great distress, I had it perfect all along.
Just to show how screwed up people's thinking is. He was all worried about that, and I was just enjoying having a few weeks off. And then look, when it came back, it's like, man, absence does make the heart.
Amen.
Yeah.
Well, that helped us know that we didn't have to feel guilty for not going to church.
Yeah.
Like God's going to go, you didn't go to church.
It spoke a silent word.
Someplace else.
It spoke. I even came in every week trying to make a video, and I started and stopped like a million times. Because I wasn't making a video because I wanted to make a video. I was making a video because I thought, I got to at least make a video. What kind of preacher am I?
Yeah.
If I'm not preaching and we're not having church, I got to do something. And so then I think the very last week when I got free of all that, and I wasn't making a video because I thought I had to make a video, I sat down and made a video.
Funny.
And it was a great video.
Yeah, right.
And the video quality isn't nice, but the content of the video is beautiful. The video quality stinks because I'm just sitting there with my iPad looking at me, and I'm in this, nasty tank top because I, started getting up and trying to do stuff. But yeah, who is man? And so every human should ask themselves that question, right? And ask it from the foundation of seeing that God sought after us when we were dead in sin. When we were dead in sin, He came to us. He drew near to us when we were dead in sin. He became a human in a perishable body. He didn't say, well, we got to wait till the human body can be made immortal and then we'll go dwell in it. Do you see what I'm saying? So God wasn't ashamed of man in their sin. How do we know? Because it was His good pleasure to dwell in man while they were dead in their sin.
Yeah.
We were all dead in our sin before the Spirit came and dwelled in us. You guys realize that, right? The Spirit didn't come to clean us up and then dwell in us. No, the Spirit came and dwelled in us as we were. Right?
Yes.
And we lose sight of that. Right? It wasn't God that was ashamed of us. It's not God that's ashamed of our weakness. And we think so much the weakness that we feel is a sign that we're not as we ought to be. It's not a sign that we're not as we ought to be. I told a good friend this, I don't know if it was yesterday or a couple of days ago. It's actually a sign we're trusting in God when we feel weak. We think that it's a sign that we lack strength. No, it's actually a sign we're not believing in our own strength. It's just we feel uncomfortable with that sometimes.
Yes.
We feel uncomfortable not having our own strength. But that's actually the place where, man, life happens. Right? And that's actually the place where you find yourself receiving strength. When you begin not being ashamed of your weaknesses. And you begin talking with one another. That's why I preached that message, bonded together in peace. We had to wait 6 years to preach that so we could be so established in grace that none of us would feel shame if we didn't do that all the time. But that's how it can happen when we're not ashamed of our weaknesses. We talk to one another. We share with one another. We share with God. And then, man, we receive strength for our weakness. Joy for our sorrow. Right? But if we keep it all in, it's a sign of pride to keep it to yourself. I still wrestle with this, and I recognize it's a sign of pride. Not pride in the sense of, look at Greg, I'm so great. But pride in the sense of looking to my own ability sometimes. Man, I can't stand asking people to do anything for me or the church.
Yeah, we all know.
Because it's almost like there's an underlying persuasion that's still being ironed out of me that it's like a sign of weakness. If I got to ask anybody for help. And I've been like that in every area of my life. And see, I'm not ashamed to say that there's still some areas where the life of God is pushing out of me these things. Right? And bringing forth His life in me. And I'm not ashamed about that. And that's probably the first time I told you guys. You see how I'm sharing my weakness with you. It's actually a sign that I'm receiving strength in that area from my weakness.
It's refreshing to hear because I think of a few moments that I've had this week and I'm ashamed of myself. I was mouthing some words that were not holy at all. And they kept adding more kids to my route. I'm a school bus driver. And while I'm driving and knowing I had to get everybody there on time, it just was not happening. And I was like, I'm just ready to explode. And to hear you say that, I can go, well, God's working that out. He's not ashamed of me. And I was ashamed of me, for even thinking, not God things.
Right?
Yeah, so thank you.
Not thinking God things, or we could feel ashamed for being confused, or what's wrong with God. Right? Like sometimes we could feel ashamed for questioning God. Listen, I question God all the time. I'll tell you now, though, from the place that I question Him from, after all these years of Him persuading me, when I question Him, I question from the foundation of I know I'm not seeing it clearly. Right? Like I've learned enough now to recognize I'm not seeing it clearly when I question Him. But listen, sometimes sometimes you're like, what the heck, man? What is going on? Didn't you send us there? I mean, I remember with the air conditioners. What are you doing, man? How can this be? I mean, just like 6 months ago. Because sometimes you have expectations and you don't know if they come from God or not, or if your definition of what you expect looks like what God sees. Like for instance, if you have a passion to preach the word, you have an expectation that word's going to do something. Right? You have an expectation that word's going to do something. But if your image of that expectation doing something is like a carnal image, like I'm going to preach the word and then we're going to build the Sistine Chapel right here in Slidell, and we're going to have this gigantic thing going on, and the people will come by the masses and we'll see everybody. If that's your expectation of what's going to preach the word, that might look different than the Spirit's view of that expectation coming to pass, but nonetheless the expectation would come to pass, right? I could preach the word and it might never look like it takes root in Slidell, Louisiana on a wide scale, but it may take root all over the world and the seed reproducing after its own kind, and it could be in 100 years that something massively takes root in Slidell, Louisiana. You see, the expectation's still met, just not by my carnal definition of it. Do you guys understand that dynamic?
It's the word that does it anyway.
Right. And so I find you even get free from that. The expectation tries to come upon you, and you start defining expectation. And so sometimes it's like about 6 months ago, every once in a while I get caught up in thinking like that. I get, you're out there preaching all the time. Sometimes you feel tired, and sometimes you feel like Paul. You cry out to God thrice, and you're thinking, "What's happening, man?"
Or is anything?
More accurately, is anything happening? Is anything good coming out of this? And so, listen, 6 months ago, I found myself asking God, man, did you really tell me just open my mouth? Did I miss it, Lord?
But you're very good at bringing us back to Abraham and telling us about Abraham. God gave him the promise, and it was 15, 17 years later. So that expectation was met. But in our lifetime, 15 years is a big chunk of time.
Right, and it can look like nothing's happening.
Yes.
And that's one of the great temptations to human beings.
Yes.
Listen, I heard clearly for many years God say, just open your mouth. But sometimes when you get caught up in judging things as good or evil, your mind can start messing with you. Right? And I said all that just so you could see that there's no shame in questioning God about anything you feel. That's actually the foundation of innocence.
He knows the question anyway.
He knows the question, but forget about whether I don't think we care about whether he knows the question. We don't want to look him in the face while we ask the question. Right?
Yes.
And so, the thought that he knows the question, it's that, am I going to confront him with the question? Right? And what I find is so many times we feel shame about that. But what happens is, man, is when that shame can be lifted, and we don't feel ashamed in our nakedness and in our weakness, or in the weakness of our thoughts, or whatever. If we have thoughts of doubt or thoughts of confusion, when we don't feel shame about that, and we just come to God with boldness. Listen, man, great salvation comes to our hearts and our souls. We receive strength for the weakness, right? We receive confidence for the shame. Right? We receive joy for the sorrow. We receive clarity for the confusion. Right? And it's like that word, reconnoiter. Yeah. We got to reconnoiter. Right? And it's like God makes straight all the crooked thoughts, all the dark thoughts that try to come against you. But if we sit in a place where we're ashamed to talk about our weaknesses with one another or with God, guess what we do? We internalize. Right. Guess what happens when you internalize? You begin figuring with your own logic. There's no figuring that doesn't result in conclusions. So, when we internalize our shame and our weaknesses and our confusion, instead of reaching out, instead of talking with God, because we want to, put on we want people to think highly of us. We don't want anybody to know, right? And we don't want to confront God and be like, what are you doing? What's going on? So when we shove it down instead of talking with God about it, what happens is, man, we push it down. We start figuring about it. Our brains start twisting on it. The carnal mind starts meditating on it. And guess what? It's going to pump out a bunch of conclusions. It's going to give you a bunch of answers. And ain't none of them going to be the truth. But I got to tell you, they're going to seem like the right conclusions.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's the truth.
Because you're feeling a powerful emotion or a powerful feeling. And so the moment you come to conclusions based on your feeling, without going to God about your feeling and letting Him discern your feeling and pumping out the right conclusion, the moment you take your feeling and push it down instead of expressing it or talking with God about it, that feeling's going to get busy with your figuring, and you're going to come to conclusions based on your feeling apart from the mind of Christ. And then you're going to come with a bunch of conclusions that aren't true.
Yeah.
See, if I would have internalized all those things I thought when the air conditioners got stolen off the roof, listen, a couple of things would have happened. I would have shut down the church probably, because I would have decided, well, we can't fix the air conditioner, we're going to shut down the church. Or I would have emptied the church's bank account to buy new air conditioners, because we're going to prove that Greg's a preacher. We're going to prove that God sent Greg here. And I would have started preaching tithing from the pulpit, because we got to get more money to make the building beautiful. I probably would have started just by asking for money, but the moment we didn't get the money to make the air conditioners, because all you guys knew grace and thought, well, man, we don't need a building to preach the gospel, I would have started then making you feel guilty for not giving the money. You start saying things like, don't any of you love God? Don't any of you care about the church? Why aren't you serving?
And here's what Jill and I said. This is the most beautiful building in Slidell. This is our own island right here.
Glory to God. Thank you, man. Thank you, man. And I feel loved by all you guys every day. And if I'm just being honest, that's what the body's supposed to do when we come together. Yes, I receive strength from God, but I also receive strength when I'm sitting around praying and I feel weakness or shame. I sit around, and God brings all you guys
We are the body.
to my remembrance.
I often think that this church is kind of like a microcosm of, the body of Christ. It's not necessarily really pretty from the outside, but you come inside and it's pretty nice.
Exactly.
Yeah, amen. Amen.
Wow.
Do you guys see how that works? But if we're ashamed to talk about our weaknesses or what we're going through, I'm telling you, figuring is coming next. You're going to figure. You're going to figure what does it mean about you, about God, about life. You're going to get to figuring. Next thing you know, you've made some conclusions and you've gone and planted those things in your heart, and now your life's going to be born from those conclusions. It's like your friend. You know when you have a really good friend, when you have a really good friend, when you can tell them what you're going through or your deepest, darkest fears and secrets and insecurities, and you don't feel judged or ashamed. That's when you know you have a good friend. Have you ever noticed that when you have someone you could do that with, that you feel strength? It's like they say you feel strength in numbers. We talk about this a lot, but support groups. There is a little bit of efficacy there. It's not like God, and so it doesn't result in liberty because God isn't a part of it. But there's a little bit of efficacy there because people feel strength in finding someone else that is there with them. They don't feel alone. Right? Well, we have a friend in God. The best kind of a friend. The kind of a friend that's never ashamed of us, no matter what we're thinking, no matter what we're doing, no matter what's going on with us, no matter how confused we are, no matter how lost we are. We have a friend in God that we can always talk about those things that we feel. And when we do, just like there's strength in these support groups, man, it's a simple sounding thing, but you find great strength in that. You find God bearing up your weaknesses. You find God bearing your burdens. Just like Paul talked about, bearing one another's burdens. Listen, man, God will bear your burden. Man, He's the best friend you could ever have. And your heart could be so persuaded of God and who God is that you could start feeling like God is even with you in a physical, tangible body. To where you'll start talking with that guy driving around in the car. You'll start talking with that guy while you're walking around. When you're on vacation or standing on the ocean or in the mountains, you'll be talking to him like he's in a body next to you. Man, God is that real in our lives.
And if you don't have that persuasion, you definitely will feel alone. You definitely will even doubt Him.
Yeah. I hope some of that makes sense. I know I rambled on about a lot of different things. Hopefully it came together and you guys made some sense out of what I said there. There was a couple of times where, if I'm being honest, I forgot what I was saying. So, and so I hope the Spirit brought me back. There's a couple of times where I got off on some of my stories, and it's like, how was I trying to connect this in? I knew this was supposed to connect in, but now I'm off on a rabbit trail and I've forgotten here.
But our dad's a great cook.
Yeah.
You took
Just
all
open your
these
mouth.
spices and herbs and everything, you put them all together, and each one of us needed to eat from that.
Amen.
Glory to God.
You know, after
Amen.
sitting in a rehab center with Cindy and her mom, the statement that we're not designed to carry burdens. When I watched, I just sat out in the front room because there wasn't room in the room for me to be there. So, but just to watch all the people coming and going, and to watch them with the burdens and to see that that's just not right. God just doesn't want us to do that. We'll try to carry all that stuff in our own strength. That he spoke very clearly to my heart about this isn't who we are. This isn't the way we're supposed to be living. This isn't right. And it was a very powerful. I sat there for a couple of hours, just like broken, as I watched people come and go.
Yeah, your heart bleeds for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really the casting of your cares. See, we think casting of our cares like a formula we work. It's a dynamic, effortless, supernatural thing when you just talk to God and pour your heart and soul out to Him. It happens. Yeah. When you pour your heart and soul out to somebody, the cares leave. You ever notice how when you feel heavily burdened by somebody, especially if you have a wife or you notice how you want to go tell them?
Yeah.
You don't want to keep it to yourself.
Right.
You notice how if you keep it to yourself, you start thinking on it? But the second you get rid of it, you're not thinking about it. It's that way with God. When you feel that burden in your heart or your soul, man, when you start talking to God about it, the care gets lifted off of you. It's a simple yet profound thing. It gets lifted off of you. It gets lifted off of you. Listen, the Christian circles I grew up around were like, don't ever do that. Don't ever let anybody see your weakness. Don't ever let anybody know that. You're not in faith, brother, if that's the case. You're in doubt. You're not believing. I mean, I grew up in that thing. It was like fake it till you make it. I mean, a lot of the ministers, and listen, I esteem them for what they taught me. And so this isn't about them, but it's about the doctrine. Man, when I started the church, a lot of the people would message me and tell me, you can't be telling people what you're going through, brother.
Yeah.
You got to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, they won't respect
They're not going to respect you. I'm not trying to get people to respect me.
But they are.
That's a novel idea, right?
Yeah.
I don't care if people respect me, man. You know what I care about? I care that people know that God loves them. And I hope they see that I love them. And if God can have a perfect work in them, I hope they love me back. That's it. Right? I want friends that are in the image and likeness of God that I can tell, that I can confess my faults to, that I can share my weaknesses with, and know they're not going to judge me. They know they're going to come hug me and say, me too, man. But God. Right? Because we all need to be reminded about God. We all need to be reminded. It's not like we're going to get to this place where we know God and we never need to be reminded.
Right.
Yes, we're going to get to the place where we know God. And we're always going to be reminded of God. Right? There's nothing wrong with that.
It's actually a lot more effective if people do what you do. Just share your heart with people, let them know who you are, what you are, and open yourself up, and then people can relate to you. And so it's more effective than the ones that stand up like the whatever statue who is perfect gold statue. You know, you don't feel like they know your heart, or that there's a connection.
There isn't a connection if they don't know your heart.
You know you're not perfect, and maybe they are, and so you can't connect with that.
Exactly.
You can't relate to that, but to you we can relate because we're all just alike.
This one thing you'll know. Whether you like me or don't like me, whether you love me or don't love me, you know who I am.
That's right.
And so you can decide what you think about it after. But there's no wondering who is that guy. Right? You can conclude after whether you like me or not.
If we like you or not, at least we know you're open and honest with us, so you care about us.
That-
We wouldn't be
Yeah.
doing that.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. You know?
We had in-laws suite at our house, and my mom was gone getting her hair done, so we cleaned her room, my son and I. My son was about his age when I got this idea. So I said, here, son, I'm going to clean up the table, hold this TV. It wasn't terribly heavy, but it was heavy. So I'm taking my good old time, I clean the table, I move the table, I sweep, and he's starting, I can see him starting to, Dad, can I put it down? No, not yet, don't put it down. So he sat there, he held that TV for a good 4 or 5 minutes, and until he almost couldn't hold it more, and I took it from him, and I put it down, and I said, now sit down with me. I said, I want to teach you something. I want you to always remember. He says, I'll never forget that as long as I live. I said, we were never meant to carry our burdens. We were never meant to carry our sins. The weight is too much. It was like you were going to drop the TV. It's too much for us to hold. It's His strong arms. And you said something to him that he wrote down about His strong arms carrying us, instead of our arms trying to carry us. So you still remember that today.
That's beautiful how you say we weren't, because we talk about carrying our burdens, but then the way you just connected it to sins is so many times we carry the burden of our sins, right? Which becomes our shame. The burden of our shame, and we walk around with that all the time, you know.
And the freedom of getting the TV, getting away. Oh,
That felt nice, huh?
good. It feels so good, right?
And that's why Jesus would come unto me, all ye that are burdened and heavy laden.
And carrying TVs.
Right.
Put them down. Put them down.
Well, Jesus knew there was forgiveness of sin in Him. And so all you that are burdened by trying to conquer your own sin and to bring forth life yourself, Come unto me, for all that is found in me for free. Right? I will conquer your sin and your death, and I will give you life. I will seat you at the right hand of God. I will cause you to live eternally. I will bring forth the love of God in you. All these things you're busy trying to do, trying to get a good report, trying to get respect, trying to get honor, trying to do something that matters, trying to have a legacy, trying to be remembered, wanting to do something important. Man, you find the satisfaction or the manifestation of all that in Jesus. You can't be any more important than God wanting to spend all eternity with you. There's no greater legacy than being called a son or daughter of God. Listen, I just want to say this as radically as I can. Even should some gigantic church or ministry be built on what we taught here for 20 years, and it looks like this beautiful, glorious thing in the earth, it's worthless in comparison to the legacy of being a son. Let it never be said that that's my legacy. Let it never be said that something I taught is my legacy. Let it never be said. Let it never be said. Let none of my works, nothing good that ever come out of me ever be said that that's my legacy. But let this be said. Greg knew God loved him.
Amen.
That's our legacy. That God's come and called us sons and daughters. You don't have a midlife crisis when you realize that. You know why we have a midlife crisis? Because we realize we're created for greatness, and then we labor and toil looking for that greatness, and we get to about the middle part of our life, and we look at our life as if our life is the life that's in the world, and we don't think we see the greatness that we know that we were created for.
Yeah.
But we've attained to the greatness we've been created for in Christ. And there's nothing greater than ascending into the right hand of God and being seated in heavenly places. You have attained to the highest glory and honor.
So we can rest.
Your legacy is eternal, man.
That's awesome. That's so good.
That's
Yes,
the only
it
way
is.
we can rest, because the world keeps, it's like we're walking through this valley of the shadow of death, and it's all around us, and it's accusing us and pressing on us to do something.
Yeah.
Do something big. And you never can do anything big enough, because somebody else is going to do it bigger or
Yeah.
better, and so why would you even try?
You can't do anything as big
No.
as being seated at the right hand of God. So all the while you're trying to do something, there's an underlying wiring in your heart that knows you were created for that. You can't do anything that can equal the greatness of being a co-heir with God in His kingdom eternally. So it don't matter how beautiful of a thing you can do in the earth, something even subconsciously in your heart will say, that's dumb. Even should you do something great.
Yeah.
It won't be long before you're like, well, man, that didn't do it. Well, yeah, because that ain't the kingdom of God. So how could it do it? And then you become confused, and then you seek the next great thing to do. Listen, Solomon did that for all of us, so we could learn from his example, and none of us could get caught up doing that. Solomon, if he could come here and stand in the body, he would say, listen, I did it all. I did it all. Everything you think you could accomplish, I did it. I was the greatest doctor, the greatest architect, the greatest musician, the greatest king, the most wise guy that ever lived. Just run down the list. He did it all. He said at the end of it all, man, I felt empty. People came from around the world to give me everything they had just to sit with me for a couple minutes. That's how great I was.
Yeah.
At the end of it all, I felt empty. At the end of it all, I felt like it didn't do anything. And he concluded, love God. Believe God. That's what he concluded. That was his conclusion. In light of me chasing all those things and doing all these great things, man, I concluded there's one thing. Believe God.
Amen.
You see it.
All right, my watch said it's time to move.
Glory to God.
Get it more.
Hi, Cindy. We love you.
Hi, Cindy.
Bye.
Bye, Cindy.